Hola clase! I am very excited because today we are going to start one of my favorite units of the entire year, which is our unit on Day of the Dead, or Dia de Muertos in Spanish. Before anybody asks me, yes, we are going to watch Coco in class because there's actually a lot of really great cultural information that we can learn by watching that movie. It's a really, really interesting holiday, and there's a lot to talk about. So before we get started, I want to sort of cover some of the general information about this holiday, so that we're all comfortable as we start exploring some of the more abstract topics that we're going to see in the coming weeks. First things first, where is it celebrated? ¿Dónde se celebra? It is predominantly celebrated in Mexico. But you should be aware that there are also places along the U.S.-Mexico border where it is celebrated, because culturally those areas are still very Mexican, right, even though they're technically part of the United States. And then there's also areas of Central America where it's celebrated, but Mexico is the predominant country where it's celebrated. And it's celebrated both privately in people's homes, as you can see here, but also publicly at church and in cemeteries, like in this photo here. And we're going to explain a little bit more about all of the different elements, all the things that you see in these photos and what it all means. When? ¿Cuándo se celebra? On November 1st and 2nd every year. So we're a little bit early, but there's so much to talk about that I wanted to go ahead and get us started in October. What is Day of the Dead? ¿Qué es? In a very, very short sentence or phrase, you could really think of it as a celebration of death. Una celebración de la muerte. Which for a lot of us sounds a little shocking and maybe kind of weird, right? Because we associate death with, the Grim Reaper, mourning, grief, dark colors, compared to what we see when we think about death in Mexican culture, these bright, vibrant colors, bright flowers, food, celebration, music. There's a very different attitude you'll see, and we're going to sort of get to the heart of where that attitude comes from. But you can see the contrast, right, between the attitudes towards death in the different cultures, but there are also a lot of similarities, right, like the flowers you see here, candles, those things are sort of universal across cultures, so we'll get into more detail as we continue through this unit. Something else that I really want you guys to keep in mind that's important is that Day of the Dead is really a mixture, or una mezcla, of Catholic, right, and indigenous religious customs. So we know that the Europeans, the Spanish, conquered the territory that we now call Mexico, but there were already people living there, and those people had their own religious customs. And so what we see very, very clearly on Day of the Dead is a mixture of the religious symbolism, right, between the Catholic, the Christian tradition, and the native or indigenous, indígena, costumbres religiosas, as you can see here. ¿Quiénes? Who are we talking about? Who's involved in celebrating this holiday? It is a holiday that is all about family, and we know that in Hispanic culture, family is a really, really important concept. But not just the living family, not just los vivos, but also the muertos, right? The muertos and the antepasados, the ancestors, are involved in celebrating this holiday. And how is it celebrated? It's celebrated by making una ofrenda to the dead. And the ofrenda, we're going to learn about what it consists of, but it includes food, as you can see here, una fotografía, photographs, velas, the candles you see here, and attending a mass, right? La misa, among other things that we're going to see. And why is it celebrated? It's to preserve the memory of the deceased loved ones, los seres queridos difuntos, and to help people cope or enfrentarse with death, which can be a difficult thing to experience, and maybe some of you have personal experience with this already, but we're going to learn more in the coming days. And so for now, what I want to ask you to do is to write a reflection about attitudes toward death in your cultures, right? What are some of the cultural practices or costumbres culturales that people from your culture do to honor the dead? Take a few minutes and reflect and write me a short paragraph about that, and then we're going to share with the class.